All right.
Hi, folks. I'm Jonathan Maberry, and welcome to Skeleton Hour. Skeleton Hour is an event of the Horror Writers Association in collaboration with the Last Bookstore in downtown Los Angeles. And please, if you're going to buy one of the books, for, either Don't Turn Out the Lights or anything we mentioned, you can buy it directly through Last Bookstore or any independent bookstore. We are big supporters of indie bookstores. And so I'm here with 5 fantastic writers and it's a pretty wide selection of writers in terms of what they do in their career paths. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'll start with Linda.
Well, hello there. I am Linda Addison. I write poetry and stories, and I just finished my first official novel in horror, and I've won some awards. You know how that goes. So happy to be in Don't Turn Out the Lights with buddies of mine here.
All right, Luis.
Hi, Luis Alberto Urrea. I write stuff, and I always wanted to be a horror writer, so I've been lucky this year. I've gotten a chance to publish 2 horror stories, and I co-wrote mine with my daughter, and happy to be here.
Well, thank you. Gaby?
Hi, I'm Gaby Triana. I write young adult paranormal suspense, YA contemporary, a little bit of adult horror, and I am also in Don't Turn Out the Lights. I have a short story there, and I have a YouTube channel called The Witch Hunt, where I interview, do recipes, rituals, witchy things, a little bit of everything.
Cool. Alethea.
I write a little bit of everything. I am a storm chaser, though not this year. I am a Saturday songwriter, definitely this year. I narrate for podcasts like Escape Pod and Clark's World, and I also contribute regular YA book reviews to NPR.
Cool. Josh.
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Malerman. I write horror novels. I wrote Bird Box and Mallory and Unburied Carol and others. I do not have any awards, Linda, but it's nice to know that you do. and that Jonathan does, and that everyone else does. I'm thrilled to be in this one, and I've been reading all the stories. This is quickly becoming one of my favorite anthologies I've been a part of, and I'm really excited to be here.
Cool. Glad to have you all aboard too. Now we're going to be talking a bit about Don't Turn Out the Lights, but also about horror in general. But let's start with the book. This is a Horror Writers Association anthology. It's the second that I've been asked to edit, and the first one was for teens. It was called Scary Out There. This one is aimed more for middle grade, though I think anybody can enjoy it. I know I've certainly enjoyed the stories, and I'm the oldest here. I'm second oldest here. I look like I'm the oldest here. It's a fun collection of stories that are entirely original. They are not an attempt to copy Alvin Schwartz's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, but it is a tribute to that series of books. Those were, incredibly landmark books that scared the crap out of legions of kids for generations. And I came to it late. Now, I'm going to ask you guys a question. Some of you have answered this in previous panels, but not everyone. So I want to start with Josh. When did Scary Stories come onto your personal radar? The original Scary Stories.
It was in the house growing up, and somehow this book has followed me from house to house without me owning it through the years. I remember, the house I grew up in. Back then, though, it was all about the illustrations, right? It was like, I don't even know if I took the time to read it. I was just so freaked out and loved the drawings. But then years later, in a college house, there it was. One of my roommates had it. Years later, I was dating this girl. We lived in this like attic-y place, and in the bathroom, there it was, and it wasn't mine. And so I've had a sort of haunting but lovely relationship with this book through my whole life, really. But it started, I was somewhat astonished to learn that this came out in the 80s, because I grew up in the 80s, and I just assumed it had been around forever before. I figured that I had met up with it in its path, but no. So, yeah.
Cool. Alethea.
I was a very scared little kid who did not like to be scared. So I really did not stumble onto the Scary Stories until college. I knew about them, but I just didn't allow myself to read them. they were just too scary for me, especially the illustrations. However, seriously, the illustrations in this book, this is the illustration for my short story, and it creeps me out. I love it so much. Oh my gosh, our illustrations are so amazing. So I think even the illustrations in this book pay tribute to the original Scary Stories, definitely.
Yeah, Stephen Gremmel did the original art, and it was fantastic. And we were fortunate to get Iris Campiot to do the art for this one, and she really catches the weird flavor.
Oh.
And it's kind of fun that she actually read the stories in order to be able to create the art, as opposed to some artists who just get like a single sentence and that's all they take. She actually read the stories and loved the stories. Gaby, what about you?
I think I was in middle school when I first saw them, and I must have seen them like in a Scholastic book fair or something. And it was supposed to be for like readers, 4th through 5th grade. And I was like, oh, that's, I'm too old for that, but it's so awesome. But I can't read it. I'm older now, but it's so cool. And then the illustrations just drew me in. And then later I was an elementary school teacher. I taught 4th and 5th grade, and I had built my library. So now I had an excuse to buy the book, and this and the first two were the books that were the most falling apart, spine just broken. It just drew in all the reluctant readers in my classroom, which is what I loved about it. I mean, aside from them being awesome stories and illustrations, it's the fact that it got kids reading who normally wouldn't read.
Fantastic. What about you, Luis?
Kids. By the way, here's my illustration that they put on. I love this picture. It's so creepy. Yeah, my kids, when they tapped into scary stuff pretty hard, and I was pushing things like Ray Bradbury, and they discovered Goosebumps, and then it opened the doors for these because I had been too old for them. And so when this opportunity came up, I just flipped out. I said, absolutely.
Yeah.
Linda.
Well, in my art, which I am so over the moon, honestly. I actually found the books in one of my, going to the bookstore like a martini evening. And my son was way too young. He was like 2 years old or 1 year old, but I was not, and totally in touch with my child. So I was like all in.
Cool. Now, my introduction to it is actually in the introduction to the book, but I had a funny moment. I was a bodyguard at the time, and I had read them while camping. So I was in my 20s, and I had them in my locker at the place where we worked. We trained and so on. And I was there, and one of the guys noticed that I have a bunch of kids' books in my locker, and he looks at them and he starts leafing through the art. I'm like, no, I'm doing it for research, and he's like, no, you're not. I get it. And he walked off. And he probably did, in fact, get it, because I was a creepy guy then, too. So each of you wrote a story that brings a weird originality and charm to it. What makes you interested in writing horror at all? And we're going to start with the person who said she was scared of horror as a kid. So, Alethea.
I would like to speak on behalf of darkness. And I say that because I have always loved death and darkness, but death and darkness and horror are not always the same thing. I mean, there's being scared for the sake of being scared and jump scares and that kind of scary. There's gory horror. There's the horror where people hurt other people intentionally. I don't like any of that. But the stars shine brighter in the darkness. And Shakespeare was one of my first introductions to like lots of death and super darkness, but also really funny stuff. So I have always loved that. And now I've forgotten the question. What was the question?
What got you interested in writing horror?
It was definitely that. I love the darkness, but I also love the optimism. And I do feel like stars shine brighter in the darkness. And all of those little humorous interludes that Shakespeare's so famous for were funnier because we were so serious and dark. And then here comes this really funny thing that snaps you out of it. So I really love that dichotomy. And so I like to go really dark and really funny and somehow end on an optimistic note. And I love the gymnastics of that. I love it.
Cool. Luis?
Oh wow, Jonathan. I come from a haunted house in Mexico, and you're gonna like this. I should start a story with this, but my grandfather was actually a necromancer, and he led all these rituals of contacting the dead, and really weird stuff happened. And so I grew up around this stuff, and I was just fascinated with it. I loved scary movies so much, and my dad especially did. And my dad would often, I'd find him arguing with a theater manager because he was trying to get me into some, mature audiences only horror film from Japan or whatever. So I just grew up loving it. And it was something that I read. And I mentioned Ray Bradbury earlier. I know we often think of Ray Bradbury as kind of sunny and, gentle, but boy, he wasn't. And the really spooky stories put me way over the top. So you can imagine in school when Edgar Allan Poe happened, and that led to Ambrose Bierce and some of his wilder stories. It was just this shadow world, and it always appealed to me. And though I don't generally write horror fiction genre stuff, those elements are in all the stuff I write all the time. And I agree with Alethea that shadow brightens the light.
I remember at a luau in Hawaii, you and I have discovered our mutual love of horror, and everybody's dancing and celebrating, and you and I are sitting here talking about the most gruesome stories we'd ever read. It was a great evening. Gabby, what about you? How'd you get into horror?
I think there's always been something wrong with me. That's what I think. When I was in third grade, my classmates would be reading, Magic Schoolhouse, Magic, whatever it is, Treehouse. Sorry if I butchered that. Babysitter's Club, and then I'm in the library researching Vlad the Impaler and vampires, and just finding the illustrations fascinating. So I've always been drawn to everything that's dark and gothic and mysterious. The more moody and atmospheric, the better.
Cool. Josh?
When I was like 10 years old or something, I was playing basketball with my cousins and my brothers, and I still to this day don't know what I said or what I came off like from my uncle to introduce me to horror, but he did. He was like, "Hey Josh, there's this movie I think that you would like to see," and he played for me Twilight Zone the movie. So I'm about 10 years old. It's a VHS tape. And if you think about that movie, number one, it's an anthology. Number two, it's really varied. There's a social commentary to open with Vic Morrow, the like racist jerk. Then it's like the heartstring kind with Spielberg's skit. Then it's anything goes with Joe Dante's Anthony and removing his sister's mouth and the cartoon world he lives in. And it ends on a creature feature, the monster on the airplane. So my very first experience with horror was like an education. It was like, and like such range. And I saw like the elasticity in the genre right away. And I've forever been enamored with that. And sometimes if I see reviews of my own stuff and it says like, every one of his books are very different, or it sounds, like a whole Unburied Carol, the Bird Box to Goblin, they're nothing alike. And I think to myself, of the Twilight Zone, the movie, my introduction to horror and to the scope of it all at once. One day I need to call my uncle and be like, how did you know? was I playing basketball and I'm like, that's, like talking about the gruesome scenes or something? Was I talking about skeletons dunking? Like, seriously, how did he know? But I'm forever grateful that he pointed me in this direction.
Hey Josh, wait, can I ask, was her name Sarah, the little girl, the sister who didn't have a mouth? He like wished her mouth away.
Yeah.
The camera pans down and she has no mouth. Yeah.
My little sister did not have a monster under her bed. Sarah lived under her bed. The girl with her mouth.
Yeah, for sure, man.
For sure. Crazy.
I know.
Linda, what got you into horror?
Well, I had a slightly different path, although I did seriously love some Shakespeare. I started reading Shakespeare out loud when I was in junior high school. Did not understand it, but loved the sound of the words. I did used to watch scary movies with my mom. but I didn't really get into horror until I was out of college and had sort of settled into a life of my own, because my growing up life was already scary. Like, the neighborhood I lived in was scary, my house was scary, and not in a good way, but maybe so now that I've been writing from there. It's worked out. So I feel like I needed to be secure before I could then face my own feelings. And a lot of mine is psychological. So I think that's really, like, by the time I felt secure enough to start facing my own feelings, then I was like, yeah, let's write all this out. Let's do this. So.
That's cool. So with horror, I mean, people who don't read horror, who don't know horror, don't watch horror movies, seem to think that horror is one thing. It's one kind of story. And and it's a closed door to them. So if you wanted to introduce someone to horror in a way that would let them see that the range of it, what might you suggest? And we'll start with you, Luis.
Wow, there's so much range. But a book that is a little bit forgotten now, but I just loved to death, was T.E.D. Klein's The Ceremonies. Remember that book?
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe if people are, Peter Straub's early horror stories and ghost stories are very literary, and maybe that would be a nice introduction.
Yeah. And by the way, shout out to Peter, who's in the hospital right now.
Yeah.
So hope he's doing well.
Yeah.
Gaby, same question.
Yeah, I was thinking Peter also, ghost story, or, just Stephen King, Carrie. I don't know, that's one of the first as a young adult stories that drew me in and made me realize that horror wasn't really, I didn't think of it as a genre. It was just the story of a girl, and horror could be the story of just about anybody. It just taking it to an extreme, whatever situation they're going through, just to an extreme, and that's what made it horror. So yeah, probably Carrie. It drew me in. So
cool. Alethea?
One of the books that I loved when I was a kid, and I still have it with its like original cover that I love so much. And I was embarrassed to have Richard Peck sign this version. And he looked at this and said, I love it because it's been read so many times, it's falling apart. It's amazing. But Richard Peck always hated his covers. And I'm like, look, Rowena did this cover. This illustration is amazing. I have it framed in my foyer. And I said, Richard, why do you hate this cover? And he said, look at her. Blossom Culp is the ugliest girl in town. And this girl is not ugly. And I was like, wow, if that's the only thing you can say, hush. I loved him so much. He was so wonderful. But I loved books like this. This was the kind of scary that was my scary, where it wasn't gross and it wasn't gory, but it was super creepy. So yeah, ghosts and things with dolls in the walls and antique shops and that kind of thing. That's the stuff that I loved.
Nice. Josh?
Probably Books of Blood, Clive Barker. I mean, it's kind of like mainlining horror the first time out, but I think that in terms of showing the stretch of the genre, like I can't really think of something more than that. In a more philosophical sense, Dracula really did a number on me because I had gone through reading a lot of the classics in high school, college, and even after, and that led me to Dracula, and which I had kind of read as a kid, but then read again as a man. And that was astonishing to me because it kind of reminded me that horror doesn't have to just be like a ghost story, or it can be like a classic. Like there's no ceiling to how good this genre can be or something. So philosophically, Dracula did a number on me, but for the actual just how far can we go in the genre, it's hard to top Clive Barker, right?
Yep. Cool. Linda?
I was trying to think of, to me, if no one had ever read horror before, I would want to give them something like an anthology that had different stories in it. Like Josh was talking about the Twilight Zone movie, because I always tell people when I go to sell my books in person that my horror is psychological. If you like blood and guts and monsters and killers, then that's not my work. There's other people's work. So I think the idea of having something that's more like a mixed salad. Honestly, right now, I'm looking at Don't Turn Out the Lights. I'm sorry, I'm not really trying to, I'm not really trying to say anything, I'm just saying. And what I love is the fact that they're short stories. And I think the idea, if no one's ever read horror before, this is a great way to do it. It's short little stories, which is to read, and they're all very different. Everyone here's stories are very different, although there's a similarity that I had a question about if we have time. If not, no problem.
We'll get to it. For my personal choice is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson.
Yeah.
Ray Bradbury gave me a copy of that when I was just about to turn 13 and told me that I had to read it, and the next time I saw him, I had to explain it to him. And almost I saw him for several years after that, and he would always ask me the same thing. He says, so if you reread it, is it a ghost story or is it a psychological story? Which is it? And I found that my answer was different each time, because every time I read the book, I come away with a different interpretation of whether it was supernatural or not. And the movie, Robert Wise's movie, the original version, which is also accessible to people who want to watch horror, because there's no blood, there's no gore, there's no actual visible monster. It's all in your head, which means you're co-creating it with the filmmaker or the writer. And that's my free dose of crack for people who I want to then get addicted to horror. But these are all good choices. So with the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the original versions of these that Alvin Schwartz did, he based a lot of his stuff on pop culture, on urban legends, on folk tales, sometimes going back years, sometimes very recent. But he wasn't necessarily creating stories out of whole cloth, because there was so much richness going on in just the whisper down the lane stories that we all heard. So when you were creating your own story, crafting your own story, how much of either urban legend or folk tales influenced you when you were writing this? And I'll start with you, Josh. Or was it whole cloth?
Yeah, from me, mine was, it's kind of a sad story what it was inspired by, but it was one of the scariest moments in my life, which was that my mom's grandma actually was, deteriorating from Alzheimer's, right? And I was walking around a grocery store with her, and grandma had a doll in her hands that she was talking to all day, that she had named, that she was taking care of, that she sincerely believed was alive. And I was 8 or something. And my mom kept, like, Josh, like, don't, stop staring. Like, this is the freakiest thing ever. You know what I mean? Like she's not well, that kind of thing. But I couldn't, it wasn't that I was even worried about grandma. I was like, is this thing alive? And later that night, we spent the night at her house in the middle of Michigan at my grandma's. And I got up in the middle of the night because I had to use the bathroom. My mom and grandma were sleeping downstairs, and I was upstairs. And between me and the bathroom was a room where that doll was sitting in a chair alone. And I came up to that room and I was like, oh, that's the doll that grandma like talks to. That's the doll that grandma thinks responds. And I didn't go to the bathroom. I don't know if I wet the bed or what, but I did not go. I went back into the room. I'm like, no, I'm not passing this door. So that's always, I understand that that's like very sad, her story, also natural, but it's sad. But that sense of like, what's wrong with grandma and that's that young sort of like, that to me was one of the first real scares of my life. And that definitely inspired my story for this one.
Boy, I'm going to reread that story with a different perspective.
Yeah.
Yikes. Linda.
Interesting. Grandma. Yeah, I have a grandma in my story too. I was influenced more by the setting that I brought myself to, because I grew up in Philly, but I used to go down south, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, to my grandparents' farm for the summer, which was way different from inner city Philadelphia, let me tell you. So it always seemed to be more magical, more, ghost in the air, and, things seemed a little less real there, which suited me just fine, thank you very much, because it was just so cool in that way. So that was where I went with this story. The house was the house of my grandparents, and the yard, the garden, all of that setting is really what got me going. And that was based on a childhood memory, so.
Interesting. Alethea.
My painting in my story, The Golden Peacock, was based on a painting that scared the mess out of me when I was a small child. So that is very real and taken from real life. But the background of the painting that I made up in the story is based on my family's history that I didn't learn about until after I was 30. I mean, I grew up and everybody said, you know, we didn't have much on the Greek side. They said all their things were lost in a fire. That was actually the Great Fire of Smyrna, back when the Turks took over the Ottoman Empire and created Turkey in 1922. And my family lived in Smyrna, which is now called Izmir. So that lovely Istanbul, not Constantinople song is actually about the genocide of my family. I just can't like that song anymore. But I learned all about this from the internet. I got to educate myself on the catastrophe of Smyrna and what happened, and the constant, they're still arguing about it 100 years later. And there are certain things that were taken from that time that people saved as treasures, or buried as treasures. And they were passed down in families, and these were the things that got held onto forever. So I based that part in sort of a folktale I created out of an actual event in history. But I will say, small Easter egg for those super Muppet nerds out there, that Melora was actually named after Princess Melora in The Frog Prince by Jim Henson.
Nice. All right. Gaby.
I tried to keep it simple. I was thinking of my students and myself as a kid, and it's funny how we all drew from our experiences as children. I was told that I was an imaginative child. I would hear things and see things, and nobody would ever believe me. And my mom, being the scientific minded one, my father as well, and you know, nobody ever believed that I was seeing people in the house and I was hearing noises at night and things that couldn't be explained. And so I just wanted to transfer that experience of being a child and not being believed just because you're a child into my story. And so that's why my story is about a little girl who keeps seeing a cat that keeps coming closer and closer and closer to the house until it's right there. And then it's left in open-ended. And I was inspired by The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Has always been one of my favorite books. And I always loved how Washington Irving just left it up to the reader. And it was the first time I read it as a kid. And it was the first time I was being asked to make my own decision about an ending. So I've always had an affection for open-ended stories. So I kind of left it a little bit ambiguous at the end.
Cool. Luis.
I always wanted to write a parable about school bullying. When I was in junior high particularly, there was a student who was bullied relentlessly, and it was ethnic and culturally biased bullying. And somehow horror elements invaded it as I was thinking about it. And that second part of where that horror stuff came from is odd, but I used to be a relief worker in Mexico with the poor. And I had, unfortunately, a lot of up-close personal experience with parasites, physical human body parasites. And, you know, the ones that gave me the worst creeps were the pale, translucent, white critters that would show up in your body. And I started getting this weird mental image ever since then of a flat, translucent, white spider tucked in the folds of my brain. And one night I dreamt that you could see its legs coming out from under the eyelid. And I was just like, whoa, talk about books of blood, you know, like call Clive Barker, I've got, and then your invitation came, and I don't know how, but those two stories melded. And part of it, I think, was taking the kid that took part in the story with me. We took her to the Baltic, and we went all over Estonia, Russia, you know, all these countries. And somehow it just started, I thought, oh, you know, what if the girl that's bullied comes from maybe a gypsy family near Chernobyl and something has happened and she has the brain spiders. And, you know, it was one of those cautionary tales. Don't bully somebody because you're going to unleash bad things, you know, whether there'll be a judgment someday for what you're doing. That's where it came from. But you know, these times, you know how it is. Sometimes a story taps you on the shoulder, and it's telling you something completely weird that you had no idea would go together. It makes a story.
That's fantastic. So one of the things I always love when, like when I'm doing book signings, I usually give out lists of other books that people might want to grab on the way out. And they aren't necessarily always the books you would immediately think of. Sometimes they're stretch books. They're a little outside. If somebody was going to buy this book, now they might buy it for their kids, but if they were going to walk out of the bookstore with this, what else should they walk out with? Give me another title. I don't care what it is, what genre, but a book you feel is really going to make an impact on them in one way or another. So we're going to start with Linda.
Oh, wow. Well, if they're children, I'm not sure what to tell them to do. Because mine is
adults buying a book for a kid. So either way.
Okay, because mine is in his 30s and it's way too late to try to keep things away from him. He grew up with me. I would say I really like what Joe Hill's been doing, honestly. He has a story collection that came out last year. Mm-hmm. Please, somebody help my brain.
Full Throttle.
Yes, thank you. Full
Great.
Throttle. Yeah, and it's got a really great variety of stories in it. They go all kinds of different ways with shadow and so forth. So I would say they will not be disappointed if they get that.
Cool. Josh?
Well, one of my favorite things about this book is that, to me, these stories, maybe they're for kids or something, but they're like scarier to me actually than a lot of more detailed and gruesome things. So what I would do to, let's say it was a buddy of mine, I'd be like, read this, and then I want you to read this novel called The Loney by Andrew Michael Hurley, who, that's a great example. It would be like the logical sort of like adult extension of the same sort of like impression scare that I find in here. In here, it's more like a whisper or this feeling versus, an image I can't shake or like a terrible thing that happened, right? It's more like this unsettled feeling. And those kind of things always stick with me longer. So, and it is sort of my favorite novels. Doesn't mean I always write that myself, but my favorite novels are the ones that are this sort of quiet, whispery horror that just unnerves me. That gives me the real nightmares. So The Loney, I think, would be a bizarre and fitting companion to this book.
Fantastic. Alethea?
So the last time you asked us this question, I wasn't in my library. So this time I came prepared. And I had said my answer at the time was Lois Duncan, which I have a copy of, Stranger with My Face, which I noticed I apparently stole from the Richland County Public Library in May 17th of 1988.
Yeah, I'm not throwing any stones there.
But the reason I bring that up is because I mentioned Lois Duncan. I forgot to mention Vivian Alcock, The Haunting of Cassie Palmer, was one of my absolute favorite books. This girl is a seventh daughter of a seventh daughter, and her mom does seances, and she has this guy who starts talking to her who's a ghost, and he is not an okay guy.
Ooh.
And it's super creepy. And all the Vivian Alcock stuff I love, because I started with the A's in the juvenile fiction section and I went all the way through Roger Zelazny. So Vivian Alcock was there at the beginning. Cuckoo Sister and a bunch of other ones. She's really great. And so many people have forgotten about her. So yes, The Haunting of Cassie Palmer.
I really like, by the way, real fast, I really like the idea of just starting in the A's. And Linda, you probably like that as well. But I really do like that idea. Like, if I have a friend, I'm like, where should I start with horror? Just start in the A's, dude. And start to work your way through it.
Gaby.
Oh, Alethea, I got to introduce Lois Duncan at one of the SCBWIs here in Miami. And that was a highlight of my life because I grew up reading her books. So yeah, I would also say Lois Duncan, but I would also, in the same vein as Scary Stories, another book that was just devoured in my classroom was Kewl Pierce, Scary Stories for Sleepovers and Spine Chillers, very similar. And then also there was a book called Wait Till Helen Comes by Mary Downey Hunt, which scared
I have that one too.
out of me. Oh my God, there it is. Because it's these two kids that move into a new house. It's standard Gothic ghost story, but they quickly find that there's a ghost of a little girl living there near the lake, near the ruins of an old house where she used to live. And they're in very similar situations with their step parents, and the little girl's trying to lure them and draw them closer to the lake to kill them the same way that she died. And it just, it exemplifies that feeling of dread. You just know something's gonna happen. It just keeps building. It's a slow burn, and I love it.
And super mean stepsister.
Yes.
Nice. Please.
I probably would have to recommend, though probably everyone's read it, but maybe not, The Stand. That book made me crazy. When I first read it, I thought, what is going on, man? And then I read Night Shift. If I could say two books of Stephen King's together, The Stand and Night Shift, because The Stand is just so epic, so audaciously plotted. It's both kind of an adventure story and a sci-fi epic and a horror story. So it covers a lot of ground. Yeah, I would say that.
Cool. For me, it's Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Oh man, yeah.
I absolutely love that book, and it can be charming if you're in the right mood, or it can scare the crap out of if you're in a different mood. Depends on what time of day you read it, or what time of year. Now that it's fall, so we have it's a couple more moments here. Just checking to see if there are any questions from Facebook. Strangely, there are not a lot of questions. I don't know why that is. But it's nice that the people, that Catherine McGee is putting up the books that we're all mentioning on the Facebook thread. So that's fantastic. So people can go and find these books because they're really great.
Yay.
Now, a question that is often asked, and this is one I love, and I know, Luis, you're not known as a horror writer, so this one's going to be, I'm going to start with you anyway. What book of yours should people start with to get to know you as a writer? And it could be nonfiction,
Probably.
fiction, you do both,
Huh?
It could be nonfiction or fiction because you do both. So
I do both. I would say probably what's kind of my life's work was a book called The Hummingbird's Daughter. It took me 25 years. It's kind of Lonesome Dove with Miracle set in Mexico. But I had to study with medicine people and so forth to write it. So I'd say that.
fantastic. Josh?
Well, I think that Bird Box is it's the same reason why I chose it to go first in the first place, was that I think it's a good debut or a good how do you do. It's a very straight line to me, Bird Box. It's black and white, simple, house, river, not too many frills to it. And I like that about it. But Unburied Carol is my favorite of mine because I feel like that's as far as I've stretched so far as a writer. And so that means something to me. So if you're into if you want to just get like a straight scare, Bird Box. But if you want something more colorful, Unburied Carol.
Cool. Alethea?
I'm torn because I love Truth About Cats and Wolves because it's got a Greek girl in it. And it was the first time I ever got to write like a legit Greek protagonist. And I love her so much. But I mean, this is the book of my heart. And it kills me that I wasn't able to finish the series because the publisher reorganized and things happened that were bad. But this book is still out there. And Katie Kellgren reads the audiobook, Enchanted. It, got nominated for awards. It's beautiful. If you do audios, I highly recommend it. It's some of Katie's best work. And she won Audio Narrator of the Year. I don't even know how many years, 4 years, I think. I love it so much. So either one of those books, I highly recommend.
And by the way, speaking of great girls, the teenage version of you and the older version of Luis are in two of my books, Broken Lands and Lost Roads. So you actually get to be action heroes at the end of time. So, Gaby.
Probably say Wake the Hollow, which is my YA paranormal mystery. If you like The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, it's kind of a rehashing. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which is a short story, it just serves as kind of like a subplot with the whole mystery plot, murder mystery laid on top of it. It takes place in Sleepy Hollow. There's a lot of gothic moodiness. There's an imagined, rumored love tryst between Washington Irving and Mary Shelley. There's just a lot going on, and it's just, I took everything that I love and just threw it into one book.
Cool. Linda.
I have two also. In general, how to recognize a demon has become your friend, which one of Bram Stoker, because I designed that for people who weren't into poetry. So it's a poem, a story, and it's science fiction, fantasy, and horror is like, you know, the table set, have what you like. And so I would say that, but if you're a poet into poetry, the latest one, The Place of Broken Things, that I wrote with Alessandro Manzetti, which also won a Stoker, is like weird poetry. And I really love what we did there. He and I ended up writing as a third kind of poet. And the stories, the music of it is just, I personally love it. So, and it seems that other people do too.
I love that book. You know that I love that book.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Give it some love too. So, so I want to talk real quickly about short stories. Now, you know, this is an anthology. It's a collection of short stories. I'm a huge fan of the short story, the short form in horror. There's something about that allows you to really scare the crap out of someone or intrigue them, enchant them, draw them in. Do you guys have a favorite horror short story? So we'll start with Josh.
Oh, favorite horror short story.
Or one that really affected you.
Yeah, there's one by Tanith Lee called The Gorgon. You ever read that one?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that story is so brilliant, man. And I read it somewhat recently, like a year and a half ago or something. And it's about a guy that hears that on this island, like a Gorgon lives on this island, and then nobody will take him out to the island. And then finally he convinces someone to take him there. And of course, this guy doesn't believe any of this. And then he gets out, I'm not gonna say the whole thing, but he gets out to the island, and on the island, there's like a freaking house in the middle of the jungle, and on the front porch is a woman wearing like a mask. And she's like, hey, like, what are you doing here? And it's like, wait a minute, is this a Gorgon? Like if she removes that, and he looks her in the face, is he gonna turn to stone? And the whole mood shifts right there. But Tanith Lee is spectacular, man. Yeah, and so the Gorgon's top shelf for me.
Outstanding. Linda.
I had to look it up because, you know, I can't even blame my bad memory on my age. I just never can remember stuff like that. I'm a poet, not a memorist. Anyway, The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe is something that I remember reading when I was in like junior high school or something. And I never, to this moment, can forget how that just got to me. Like, it just got to me, the idea of the whole thing, like somebody's heart being out of them and it's still beating. I was done. And his language in it is amazing. I really think that's a lot of him and Shakespeare and other people like that had a lot to do with the voice I write with poetry. So, and that's a story, but still, it's very poetic to me.
Fantastic. Luis?
This is obscure because he's largely unknown in the United States, but you can find it in translation. Latin American writer named Horacio Quiroga, Quiroga, and he has several really creepy stories, but my favorite is called The Feathered Pillow. And I don't want to say too much about it, but you know, it's a tropical, jungly story. Awesome. About a landowner who marries his beloved, and she gets weaker and weaker and weaker and unable to get out of bed. And it has something to do with the feathered pillow. That's all I'll say.
Cool. Gaby?
Linda took my answer.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, I'll just add real quick to what she said is just, I read a lot of horror as a kid, and a lot of it was supernatural. And this was the first story I read that told me that a human could do this to another human. And that was horrific for me as a child. So it wasn't just about monsters and ghosts and things that go bump in the night. Like your next door neighbor, the old man next door could be the killer. And that really impacted me a lot.
Nice. Alethea?
Poe was totally my boyfriend when I was in high school, I will have you know. However, the one I want to tell you about is, it's actually a book, and it's actually by a poet. So it's like, I'm crossing all the lines, saying all the wrong things. But this is a book called Severance by Robert Olin Butler.
Oh, yeah.
The conceit of this book is that after your head is cut off, it lives for 2 minutes. So each of these pieces is exactly 160 words long. And it is like the last 2 minutes of Marie Antoinette, and the last 2 minutes of some of the Stuarts, and the last 2 minutes of some very interesting people. And it is fascinating and creepy, and I love it so much. And I went to Southern Festival of Books once to meet Robert Olin Butler, and I like had the most amazing time and did everything in the world except meet Robin Olin Butler. So I have like 1 million copies of this book because I was supposed to get him to sign them all, and I still have them. So Robert, I need you to sign these books for me.
Cool. Mine is actually novella. It's a short novel, long short story, however you want to look at it. It's The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval, which I thought was an absolutely brilliant piece of work. He took one of H.P. Lovecraft's most powerful and yet most racist stories and completely flipped it around and told it from the perspective of the black character. And it was my introduction to Victor's work. I have since gotten him to write for Weird Tales, and he is a great new voice in horror, and that story is fantastic. It's one of those, sometimes when I get a short story I really love, I will actually read it aloud to myself. And I read this aloud to myself, and it's so good. It's so rich and beautiful. And that's the fun thing about horror stories. I mean, they go all the way back. There's a lot of great horror stories. We mentioned Joe Hill earlier. Stephen King has written some fantastic horror stories that the people who read his novels may not know. There's tons of stuff out there, and it's a great introduction to horror because within an anthology, just like we have within our book, you see a range of storytelling styles and a range of storytelling subjects. It goes anywhere. You never know what's going to be in the next story when you turn the page. And that's what I love about collections, anthologies, and also horror magazines. And the Horror Writers Association has always celebrated short fiction. And it allows us to dive into a weird world for a moment or two, and then come out of it, and sometimes bringing baggage with us, which is a lot of fun, some scars. So we're about to wrap up, but I have 2 more quick questions for you guys. First, what area of horror haven't you written yet that you want to write? And I'll start with Alethea. Or either want to write or people would be surprised if you wrote.
I mean, I do whatever I want, so I don't know. I wish I could write more horror poetry. I would really love to be able to do that. I've written a little, but I would really love to do more. Does that count as an answer?
It does. It's a very good answer. Yeah. All right, Josh?
I want to do a whole epic poem, novel size, but I'm afraid it would all be like Dr. Seuss rhymes, like the whole way through. But then maybe I just need to embrace that.
Me and you and Linda, we're totally going in on a thing. We got to make it happen.
That has been a long, God, it gets so cheesy so fast in my hands. I think people would be really shocked if I wrote a really brutal, Ketchum brutal novel. I don't know if I have that kind of darkness in me, but I would love to do an epic poem, dude. Yeah.
Nice.
You're on.
Gaby.
Probably body horror. I don't have anything, and it's always fascinated me in film and in books, but I haven't written anything like it. I think that would make people, while reading it, just turn it around and check the cover to make sure they're reading a Gaby book. But yeah, body horror for sure.
Linda, what about you?
Gaby just stole my lines like I stole hers before. I wrote down in my journal, body horror, but you know what? I think maybe an epic body horror poem with Josh and you know who with the purple hair. I'm just saying, we should do this. We should just do this. Let's fulfill all our dreams.
Cool. Luis.
Well, interesting you should ask that question because I did it. I've wanted to write a mythology-based horror story for a really long time. And, long story short, I was talking to Neil Gaiman because he was asking me about Mexican gods. And he was telling me, you should write Mexican gods. And I said, I should. And I did. And it's in the last issue of McSweeney's. I don't know if you know McSweeney's.
Oh, yeah.
And I was so happy because it made the cover and everything. And it's quite long. It's called The Night Drinker. And it's probably the scariest thing I've ever written in my life. So I'm super happy because, a many years desire came true because the venue opened. They said, you want to write? And I thought, oh, yeah, okay.
That's pretty great. I'm definitely going to grab that one. Okay, and the last question, it's a pretty obvious one, but where can people find you online? And we'll start with Linda.
Well, I love saying my site name, which is Linda Addison Poet, because there is another Linda Addison who's a lawyer and doesn't look anything like this. But one day there's going to be a picture of us together because I think it would be awesome. So yeah, or you can just look me up anywhere.
Cool. Josh?
Just everything my name, joshmalerman.com, Josh Malerman on Facebook. There must not be another Josh Malerman in America, or at least or anywhere. Yeah, that's it. Instagram, I do a lot on Instagram because Allison, my fiance, does a lot of cool stuff. So I do a lot of stuff on there.
Yep. Alethea?
Just like Josh, I am AletheaContis.com or AletheaContis just about anywhere else on social media. You'll find me.
Fantastic. Gaby?
GabyTriana.com, same for Instagram, same for Twitter, but I also have a YouTube channel, The Witch Hunt.
Yeah.
Just launched, got lots of cool interviews and stuff coming up, got lots of cool stuff planned, and I also have the Witch Hunt blog to go with it. It actually started as a blog and has now morphed into a YouTube channel because I think it's a lot more fun that way. So look for me there.
Cool. Luis?
On Twitter, it's Urrealism, and I'm on Facebook and all that other stuff. And I have a website, luisurrea.com. So I'm all over the place too.
Cool. As am I, if you spell my last name right, M-A-B, not M-A-Y-B.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you all for joining me, for talking about Don't Turn Out the Lights, for talking about scary stories, and also all kinds of scary stories. And it's wonderful that a whole bunch of apparently nice people have this dark, weird side to them. I'm a big believer in better out than in. So, I figure one good horror novel's worth about 6 months of therapy.
Yeah, right on.
Anyway, for anyone who's watching who is not a horror fan, and I know this is going to be, right now we're live streaming to Facebook, but we're probably going to put this on YouTube and elsewhere. So people may be exposed to it who came to it because they're buying Don't Turn Out the Lights for their kids. But please take a shot at horror. If you listen to this whole hour, you're going to see a lot of recommendations for really good books, short stories, poetry. There's a lot out there. It isn't what you necessarily think. Go investigate it because there's a lot of great writing there. There's a lot of great entertainment there. And you're going to be very pleasantly surprised about what horror is. So thank you all. And don't turn out the lights.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.